We should probably do some sort of introduction. Like, hi, everybody. I'm Patricia.
I'm Lee.
And we're weird as fuck.
Yeah, I suppose you probably should, I guess, huh?
Yeah. Because someday we might be famous. Okay. So. I don't know how people can record while wearing headphones. It makes me crazy.
They listen to their voices, but usually it's like 4 or 5 people all together. I guess it's hard not to hear them when they're spread out through a whole room.
Well, I don't know about that. I know that it would be distracting if you had people around you and you were trying to talk, trying to be recorded. But yeah, when I've tried to listen to myself as I'm recording, there's always just that little bit of a beat difference. And it throws me off. I don't know how they can do it.
I don't know why you would want to listen to you. I thought they were listening to the other people or something.
Yeah, I don't. Clearly, I'm not well versed in this. So today's topic is an interesting one. It's weird. It's real weird. But it's also kind of comforting. Today we're going to talk about terminal lucidity. And I've decided that I am no longer going to hide my topics from you and surprise you on the day of recording because you tend to listen to me while I'm talking instead of interacting. And that's not a lot of fun for the people who are trying to listen because I want your input. I want your takes. And I do appreciate that you're being such a good listener, but.
Yeah. Makes for a more boring show, I guess.
No, it's just, people want to hear what you think too. I'm assuming as much as
I would hope so, but who knows?
Maybe that's just arrogance, assuming that anybody wants to hear what we have to say. But we've got, there's 1,000 people listening, so.
It's starting to get up there.
Somebody wants to hear what we're blathering on about. Or maybe they just listen to us because they think, wow, I am a pathetic shithead. These people make me feel so much better about myself. Okay.
But with our weird as fuck name, it's going to be hard to advertise.
Well, no, because there's an asterisk. It's fine. Okay, so we're talking about terminal lucidity. Now, we've talked about this before. So do you remember what the term means?
Not really.
It's a moment of lucidity, of clarity, immediately prior to death.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Now I remember.
And so I'm going to read mostly from my notes just because it's kind of a big topic. We only have 30 minutes to discuss it, and I don't want to skip around and make it any more confusing than it already is. So the phenomena of a sudden awakening by a terminally ill patient in the hours, days, or even weeks prior to death is called terminal lucidity. In many cases, patients who are completely incapable of coherent conversation have suddenly reverted to their prior selves. So think of comatose patients, brain damaged patients, patients with Alzheimer's and dementia.
Then all of a sudden they're normal.
All of a sudden they're fine. And then they die. And oftentimes they're aware that they're dying. So I can't remember the character's name for the life of me, and I forgot to look it up before we recorded. You remember that episode of Grey's Anatomy immediately following the plane crash, right?
Yeah.
And is his name Eric?
I don't remember any of these people's names.
I don't remember that. So there is that one doctor that was the cosmetic surgeon, and he was badly injured. He was in a coma for a while. And then one day he just woke up and he was fine and he was talking and chatting and really feeling good. And he's chatting with everybody in the room. And then there's a quiet moment when he's just talking with his doctor. And he says, "It's the surge, isn't it?" And this is what he's referring to, that immediate feeling that all is well. You feel great. You feel energetic. You feel more aware than you have. And you understand that this is an impermanent state.
Yeah, what's up?
Maybe. I mean, if you've lived in agony for years or you've lived in this fog and you're suddenly aware that that's the alternative, maybe it doesn't suck so bad. to know that you feel great. You have a moment that you can say what you need to say to the people that you care about. And you don't have to go back to that state.
That part would be good, to be able to talk to your loved ones before you died.
I think it also provides a certain sense of hope that whatever damage your body has incurred that made you that unrecognizable creature didn't impact who you are, because who you are is still in there, right? Otherwise, that lucid moment wouldn't be possible.
Yeah.
So, doctors have reported seeing patients with terminal cancer suddenly sitting up in bed and conversing with family as if there was nothing wrong, only to die of the disease a short while later. Likewise, patients with advanced dementia and Alzheimer's disease have been reported by medical staff as suddenly being entirely lucid. They recognized friends and family and even recalled events from their early days in life. Now, early in life isn't so surprising to me because it's well documented that patients with Alzheimer's and dementia often lose short-term memory first. So the more recent events go first, which is weird because you know that my grandmother had dementia before she died.
Mm-hmm.
And she didn't remember me. She didn't remember her own son, but she remembered you, which pissed a lot of us off, just so we can...
Yeah.
She adored you, though, so maybe not so surprising. You treated her so much better than so many other family members did, and that made an impact. She thought you were quite special. Doctors have reported seeing patients... Oh, wait a minute. I've just read that paragraph. Let's skip that one. While the phenomena isn't new, there have been anecdotal tales going back as far as Hippocrates, a Greek philosopher that existed several thousand years ago, and probably even further because, prior to that, did we document this sort of thing? The term is a new one, however. Like I said, it's been called the surge. It's been called any number of things. But Dr. Michael Nahm wrote an article in the Journal of Near-Death Studies in 2009 where he coined the term terminal lucidity, and it's kind of making its way into the mainstream. In one groundbreaking study in Australia, terminally ill patients' brain waves were monitored prior to the end of life. In more than 70% of the subjects shortly before death, their brains exhibited a sudden surge of activity. Some even woke up out of a coma. So even those that aren't awake and alert and talking are showing real chemical signs that there's increased activity in the brain. Now, why that would be, is it just the brain attempting to protect itself? And if so, why the awareness? What's the process that allows it to do that? Imagine if it were something that we could replicate.
One less fleeting surge out of your brain before you die.
Exactly. A brief moment of clarity, but what if it's something that we could chemically recreate and make it not a temporary or terminal event?
Yeah, the problem is the rest of their body is dying, not their brain in some instances, and I don't think you're going to fix that. Well,
I'm thinking not necessarily with somebody who's riddled with cancer or taking a severe head injury or something like that. I'm thinking, in the cases of Alzheimer's, if they could figure out the process for this, is it something that could be used to treat brain disorders?
You would think so.
Maybe. I mean, I'm not a doctor. I'm just spitballing here. But so one of the most famous cases of terminal lucidity ever occurred in 1922. Anna Katarina Emmer, they called her Kathy, was a 26-year-old woman with severe mental disabilities. She had all of her life exhibited these disabilities. It wasn't something that happened to her as she went through life. It wasn't a disease. It wasn't an accident. She was born with mental disabilities and had them up until the day she died of tuberculosis in 1922 at Hefeda, a German institution for people with those disorders. She'd been at the institution since she was 6. Can you imagine?
That would suck.
That would suck. She was never known to have spoken a single word in her entire life. She only made animal-like guttural noises. She gorged her meals. She was never toilet trained. She never spoke to anyone. ever. So in the 20 years that she'd been in this institution, that was her existence. And the medical staff knew that to be her natural effect. But as she was dying, she began to sing songs about her dying experience, including an old Protestant hymn, "Where Does a Soul Find Its Home?" So this person that had never spoken, had never interacted with staff in any real connective way, was singing religious songs in perfect German. So at some point, some level of her brain was aware enough of her surroundings that it picked that up, and it picked up the ability to speak. Now, I've listened, you know that I'm studying Spanish in a really, really sad attempt to learn to speak the language, because apparently I do not have a gift for languages. And I've listened and listened and listened, but it takes practice to actually speak, to form those words.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. But she was able to do it.
That one's definitely weird.
That's the strangest.
And that she sang.
And that she was singing. Singing is easier than speaking.
Not for me.
Well, think about. I mean, I remember one of the huge bands back, in the 60s, 70s. ABBA. When I love ABBA.
They banded ABBA.
No,
like,
no. I mean, when ABBA was first making music.
Okay. Yeah.
No, when ABBA was first making music, they didn't speak English, but their music was in English because it was easier to sing it than it was to form the sentences. Because when you're singing, you only have to memorize the lines, right? Mm-hmm. You don't actually have to interact with somebody else and try to make conversation. So maybe the song was just something that she had picked up and it was easier, but clearly on some level she understood, right?
Yeah.
Because she's singing about dying.
She's got to have the words memorized in her head.
And they also said, according to reports, that she was also making up songs. So she had enough understanding of language, this child that had never spoken and never in any way exhibited what we would consider human-like behavior, was able to do this. And creating music, creating a song, that's pretty high-level functioning. So it's one of the most fascinating cases I've ever read. So my next one, and I have a few of these. So these are all anecdotal tales that we're going to take on from here on out. The next one is Bernadette Morley. She wrote about her mother's end of life. Her mother died of an aggressive form of brain cancer, which claimed her just 93 days after her initial diagnosis. So imagine going to the doctor because you have a chronic headache and 3 months later you're gone. She spent most of her final days in a coma, but right before the end of her life, she awoke. She was animated and completely aware of her surroundings and the people who'd been coming to visit her. Her family was gifted with 2 hours with her so that they could talk to her and ask her questions and tell her how much she meant to them. And she was able to do the same. She talked about the people that had been in the room and gave messages to those people who'd been kind enough to come and visit her, told her kids how much she loved them, and said her final goodbyes, and then she was gone. So an aggressive form of brain cancer. So her brain is literally killing itself. And yet she sits up and she speaks to the people that she loves as though nothing is wrong.
Yeah, it's weird. Because the speech pattern should be fucked up. Shouldn't be speaking clearly, at least. So.
Well, that and, I mean, depending on where the tumor was, it can affect everything. It affects personality. It can affect your vision, your ability to speak, whether or not you're able to breathe, incontinence, your gross motor. I mean, our brain is the control center for our bodies.
Yep.
And according to her story, her mom was completely herself. So she wasn't tremoring, she wasn't seizing, she wasn't doing any of the things that you would expect to see somebody with a brain full of cancer doing.
It's definitely weird.
So one of the best known examples was reported in 1975 in an article by Russian researchers who, while studying pre-death conditions in schizophrenics, identified three examples of terminal lucidity. It wasn't called that then. Each of the patients in question had spent at least the previous 10 years of their lives in a psychiatric hospital due to their schizophrenic conditions. And now, not everybody who's schizophrenic is dangerous, obviously. There are plenty of people who do well with medication and therapy. These people, however, had severe cases of schizophrenia, and they were considered a danger to themselves or their families, and were put in an institution for the safety of themselves and the community. So these are people that were pretty far gone. For two of them, approximately 6 weeks before their deaths, and the third at some unknown time prior, they apparently, with the third one, they weren't documenting it quite as carefully, so they didn't know when this started. They began to improve mentally to the point that their overall behavior became almost normal by the time they died. So it's almost as though in the few weeks prior to their deaths, their conditions began to reverse themselves until they were normal, and then they died, which...
But they're not reversing because they're dead.
Right. So, but why? Why did that happen? What was the process that caused that to happen?
Well, of course, the religious people are going to say it's God and it's a miracle.
Well, and who are we to say
So, who knows?
The frustrating thing about religion for me is that you can't disprove it. You can't prove it because you have to take it on faith, right? But I can't disprove the absence of something.
Yeah, but...
So, I mean...
Who knows what's out there?
Who knows? So, this one was interesting to me. I read a story about, and this is just a real quick blurb that I took off of a hospice website. And they spoke of a man who was suffering from malignant tumors in the brain. And a brain scan toward the end of his life demonstrated the tumors had destroyed and replaced nearly the entire organ, by which time he had lost the ability to speak or move independently. So basically his brainstem was active, and that was allowing him to breathe on his own.
That's about it.
And that's about it. About an hour before he died, he woke up, said goodbye to his family, had a brief conversation with them, and then died. How do you do that with no brain?
Pretty hard to do. So, yeah.
In another case they cited, a nun who went, they quote unquote, raving mad after suffering from a bout of scarlet fever suddenly recovered after 3 years of derangement. Concurrently, she'd also developed a persistent fever that debilitated her physically. So basically, she was incapable of caring for herself in any way that was meaningful at all. Interestingly, the more her physical state declined from the last fever, the saner she became, to the point that just before she expired, she reportedly lost her madness entirely. In the subsequent autopsy of her brain, it was so swollen that as soon as the cranium was cut open, her brain forced itself out and wouldn't go back in again.
Ew. That would be pleasant.
Yeah, can you imagine the sound that must have made when they cut open her skull?
Be gross.
Hey, well,
then the pain she had to be in with her brain swelling like that.
There's no nerves in your brain.
Yeah.
So, but the fact that she was lucid and talking when her brain was swollen to that point, that should have sent her into a coma. It should have killed her. She should have been dead long before that.
Yeah.
The brain wouldn't necessarily continue to swell after death. So that happened before she died.
Yeah.
And yet she was chatting away while her exploding
Strange.
brain was destroying her ability to live. Exploding Brain. That sounds like a punk band. The kids used to make slime with me, and we'd put it in containers, and they'd force their little hands in it because it made that really awesome sucking noise. I imagine that's what that brain must have sounded like as it was trying to The look on your face. Oh my God, we need cameras.
Make it sound like so much fun, honey.
You need to live in my head. It's fun here. Okay, so there's another story of a woman who had suffered from Alzheimer's disease for about 9 years, and she'd gotten to the point where she couldn't recognize her son or any of the people from her normal life. Within a day of her death, not only did she regain recognition of her family, but also the knowledge of things that she hadn't seemed to have been aware of previously. So what they mean by this is that not only did she recognize her family, but she was aware of the things that had been happening over the past 9 years. She knew where she was. She knew how old she was. She knew what the date was. She knew what people had been saying and doing around her. So let's hope that she was in a good care facility and not one of those ones where people...
There's a lot of shitty ones out there.
There are. And it absolutely gets me to think of these people who are in care facilities who are incapable of communicating when somebody's been abusive to them.
Yeah.
And, what if they're like this lady and they're actually aware that it's happening? They haven't checked out. They're just unable to open the door.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of those that go on that they don't know what's going... They don't look like they know what's going on, but yet their brain is functioning, but they just can't talk or, act like they have a brain, but they do.
Yeah, they're just locked into a part of their consciousness that we can't access.
Yep.
Which, that terrifies me.
That would suck.
That's why I don't want your mom to go into a long-term care facility. I know she's got these big plans and she doesn't want to be a burden, but fuck that. We've got room.
Yep. She doesn't seem to be too opposed to staying here when things are going bad anyway, so I don't think it's going to happen.
Yeah, I think the idea's growing on her. So, in the final one is another Alzheimer's patient who'd also been incapacitated and unresponsive for years. And a few minutes before her death, she woke up, sat up, and chatted with her very confused daughter. And then she died.
That would be weird.
It would be weird. It would be really confusing. It would make you wonder, okay, how much of what I've said to you over the years? Because that people with Alzheimer's can sometimes become violent.
Yeah, they can do all kinds of mean shit.
It's a sad fact of the disease. And imagine if just out of your frustration, you'd said something that was unkind. And you think, that was horrible to say that, but it's okay because they won't remember it. But they do.
Yeah, they do that. Oh.
I read a story about a young man who was in a coma for something like 17 years. It was a long time. And his mom would come and visit him and she'd read to him. And he remembers her saying that she wished he would die. Not because she didn't want to be burdened by him, but because the idea of him existing like that, rather than being able to live his life, was just breaking her heart. And she felt that he would be better off if he could die and go to heaven, because that's where she thought.
17 years, that's a long time.
Yeah, he was a really young man when he went into the coma and, a full-assed adult when he finally woke up. But imagine, though, your mom telling you that, I wish you were just dead already. That would be awful. Absolutely awful. So that's terminal lucidity. The surge, the unexplained surge, I should say, of awareness immediately prior to death.
It's strange.
It begs the question of what's really going on inside of our minds and how can we access that? If there was a way to access that, if somebody slipped into a coma and there was a way that we could communicate with them, knowing that awareness is there, they're in there.
Yeah, then of course it could be a miracle and it has nothing to do with it. So who knows?
Exactly. I believe in science. I believe that if there is some great universal creator, that it isn't a wave of a magic wand. It's everything that exists can be quantified. We can drill down to the quantum level to understand how we became how we are. That doesn't make it less miraculous. And I think it doesn't necessarily mean that there isn't some great creator, but it can be explained through scientific processes. So what is the process here?
Well, I can't explain this.
Yet.
We
couldn't explain flight either, and we cracked that code.
Yep.
So there you go. Terminal lucidity. Weird as fuck.
Yes.
I think it's real weird. I don't ever want to see it because I don't want to be around when somebody dies.
Me neither.
I just don't.
But it's inevitable, unfortunately.
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm going to die someday. Nobody gets out alive, right?
No, not yet.
I just want it to be quick and painless. That's all I'm asking. I don't want to know what's coming. My aunt went to the doctor, went for her checkup, came back with a clean bill of health, was feeling a little sleepy, went to bed early, and died. That works for me. I'll be okay. Anywho. So there you go. Like us, follow us, come visit us sometime, and send us your stories. Not necessarily, death stories, unless it's something real weird, but...
As long as it's weird as fuck, send it in.
We want to hear it. All of it. I think it'd be fun to start doing listener stories.
Yep.
Maybe, someday.
We'll see.
Not right now. All right. Thanks for tuning in.
Bye.
Bye. Want to stay connected between shows? You can find us on Instagram at WeirdAsFCKPodcast, on Twitter at WeirdAsFuckPod1, on Facebook at WeirdAsFCKPodcast. Send us an email at weirdasfckkpodcast@gmail.com, or come on over to our website at www.weirdasfck.com. There you can check out our blog, pick up some merch, look over our sources, and even share your weird experiences. You might even make it on a future episode. We would love to hear from you. Until then, tune in and keep it weird.